Okay, guys, I'll just run through the agenda, what's in store for today, and then we'll get started. So, just as an introduction or an overview, I'm going to touch on the EPLAN data portal and the advances in the EPLAN data portal, and then some practical tips and tricks, basically best practices for panel layouts and also manufacturing. Then I'll touch on the overview, which is basically EPLAN's offering. That's our current 2D offering, the 3D add-on, as well as Pro Panel add-on. Then I'll jump onto a live demo where I'll run through some 2D panel layouts, some tips and tricks on that, a gear tray configuration, efficient device placement. I'll talk about some key settings and how to streamline your workflow. And I'll place an enclosure legend. I'll update that enclosure legend as well. And then I'll jump onto the 3D, exactly the same project, how to lay this out in 3D. And I'll spend a bit more time on the 3D and maybe a bit less time on the 2D, since most of you are familiar with the 2D. I'll just touch on it very briefly and jump onto the 3D side of things. I'll create a layout space and insert an enclosure, accessories. I'll configure the gear tray in 3D and place a few of the devices in there. I may not do the entire panel layout, but you'll get the idea. And talk about some of the key design features and checks. Basically, we'll try to create a digital twin. And then I'll show you how to take that information and display that in your page layouts. That's your model view, drilling view, etc. And we'll finish off with a few questions and answers if you guys have any. Okay, so it's quite a packed agenda, so we'll get started straight away. So we'll start talking about the data portal. And for us, this is a real game changer, or for EPLAN, this is a real game changer. So for those of you who are not familiar with the data portal, there's approximately 1.2, in fact, over 1.2 million parts on this data portal from over 450 manufacturers. And because it's a live data portal, it's continuously growing. When I first started with EPLAN 13, 14 years ago, there were like 100,000 parts on this data portal. And now, every month, there's like 100,000 parts being added to this data portal. So it's growing really fast. And all the major manufacturers that we use in New Zealand are on this data portal. There's hardly a manufacturer, a major one, that's not on the data portal. But more importantly is the information that's now being uploaded to the data portal, from 3D graphics to 2D graphics to commercial data, your macros for your schematic, your connection point patterns, especially if you're using the 3D or Pro Panel and so forth. That's a really key requirement. Your function templates are really up to date, and drilling patterns, all of that stuff. So there's a whole host of information that's available when you download this part from the data portal. It's more than just schematics. It's a whole suite of information, including documentations, PDFs, all of that stuff is all available on a single download. So it's a really useful and a growing part of EPLAN, and certainly there'll be a lot more to come with the data portal in years to come. So my advice, if you're not using the data portal, maybe start using it. There's a lot of good information there. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more, and I'll show you how that works maybe a little bit more later on. So I'll move on to some practical tips and tricks, best practices for panel layouts. This is by no means telling you how to do things. I'm sure you guys, everyone has got their own ways and their own preference on doing things, but just some pointers, some things that can point you into the right area, some things that you should consider or take into consideration when creating a panel layout. Okay, obviously it starts with the design. So you've got to complete your electrical design first, your electrical schematic drawings and all of that stuff. Once that's done, the next step is to plan your panel layout. And there's a few important things that you should take into consideration when planning your layout. And of course, it starts by adhering to the correct spec or the correct standards that you guys are using. And in New Zealand and in Australia, we use the NZS 3000. In other countries, European countries, the IEC standards, the Americas, North and South America, the UL standard. So it's important to adhere to those standards, and we talk about that a little bit more as we go along. Plan your layout before actually getting down to the shop floor, and of course the best place to start planning that is in EPLAN. Lay out your gear tray. It's easier to move things around on paper than what it is to actually move it out in reality on the shop floor. So the whole saying is measure twice, cut once, and that is true with the panel layout. Place your devices, move things around, find the best flow and things like that before you could actually start wiring. Of course, it starts by knowing where your enclosure is located. Is it located indoors? Is it located outdoors? Is it located in a food hygiene area? And that helps you to select the correct IP rating for this enclosure. And that will also determine your cable entry. And your cable glands. So where's your entry? Is your entry on the top, at the bottom, on the sides? What type of glands are you going to use? IP65, food-rated glands, or whatever. And more importantly is where to position your terminals. Of course, if you've got cables that are entering from the bottom, it makes sense to place your terminals at the bottom. You don't want chunky cables, running through your wire ducts to get to your terminals. So it should be as close as possible to your entry point. And sometimes you might have 2 points of entry. You might have your outgoing cables at the bottom and maybe your incoming supply on the top. So that will determine where your isolator is going to be located. Talking about the isolator, it's important to place your isolator in the correct location, not only your isolator, but E-stops and HMIs. So plan that as well. Typically, your isolator needs to be placed within arm's reach. So an average person is, say, 1.7, 1.75 meters. So your isolator shouldn't be, say, more than 1.9 meters and below, say, 600 millimeters. So factor that into your panel, and also factor the fact that you may have a plinth and what size plinth that is. Is it 100, 200, all of that information. Typically, your E-stops will be placed somewhere around 900 to 1200 millimeters from your platform. So you need to factor that in. HMIs, typically the center of the HMI around about 1.6, 1.65. So again, those positions and the heights are pretty important there. Segregate your power control and your communication devices. Obviously, you need to adhere to the manufacturer's requirements in terms of EMC requirements and all of that, insulation ratings and all of that stuff. So it's best to segregate your power control and your communication device to prevent noise and all of that stuff. And make sure you allow sufficient space for future expansion and for maintenance purposes. Typically, specs call for somewhere around 20 to 25% spare capacity at the end of the project. In other words, once the project is completed. So you want to start much higher. You want to start at maybe 30, 35% and end up at about 20, 25% spare capacity. Okay, in terms of components, component layouts, of course, it's important to mount your devices securely. Whether those devices are mounted on a DIN rail or mounted directly onto the gear tray, they need to be mounted securely, especially when the installation is in a high vibration area. If it's on a mobile device, you got to make sure that your DIN rails are secured properly and your devices onto those DIN rails are secured. You don't want them falling off and causing a fire or something like that. And same with devices on the gear tray. Maybe try drilling and tapping rather than just trying to fix them directly onto the gear tray without a proper drill and tap. Group your components by function. That comes back to the point where we just mentioned earlier on. It's best to group items like your PLCs and your motor starters into separate areas, so that you don't have your low voltage and your high voltage interfering with each other. Keep your heat generating devices like VSTs separated. You don't want your VST is blowing warm air right into the PLC, so you want that moved as far as possible from each other. Installing your components, and just make sure you adhere to the manufacturer's requirements with regards to clearances. Typically a VSD, somewhere depending on the size of the VSD, 50, 100, maybe 200 millimeters above and below clearance. So you need to adhere to that. The good thing is that, and I'll show you this later, EPLAN has got tools to manage some of these checks and balances. Ensure an efficient wiring flow. Of course, if you look at a circuit breaker, and like in this case here, what's highlighted in blue, I've got 3 e-stop zones, and I've got a first channel and a second channel contactor. In there, you don't want the contactors to be placed, in an area where it's, the circuit breaker at the bottom and the one contactor on the top and the other contactor at the bottom. It's not efficient in terms of your wiring. So you want to have a nice wiring flow in there. So it's best to look at the schematic drawings and lay your panel out so that you get a good wiring flow and you use as less wires as conductors as possible. Wiring duct and your wiring itself, and again, it's best to use slotted ducting, and that helps with your airflow as opposed to solid ducting. And of course, it's easier to run your wires through a slotted ducting than what it is to run through solid ducting. Just make sure you keep sufficient space for future expansions in your duct, so maybe no more than 50% when you start off with, so you allow sufficient space for airflow as well as future expansions. Route your cables carefully, and you want to separate your low voltage from your extra low voltage. So from your 400 volts from your 24 volts. And that's because of the insulation ratings are sometimes different from your low voltage to your extra low voltage cables. So you want to keep them separate. Make sure you adhere to the bending radii of your cables, and depending on the power cable, it can range anything from 6 to 10 times, maybe more, depending on the size. So make sure you check that so that you don't bend them too sharply. And what type of cable is it? Finely stranded? Is it stranded? Is it screened cable or armored cable, or whatever the case might be? So just check that out. And adhere to the wire colors. And also, when you placing your trunking, just make sure you allow sufficient space to see your wire numbers. Typically 40 to 50 millimeters above and below your devices, so that your wire numbers can be visible. Identification and labeling, this is quite an important part of the panel layout as well. Just make sure that your warning labels are clear. Your high voltage isolation, your main isolator, your live components. Sometimes you might have a circuit breaker that stays on even when the main isolator is on. Could be for a light or something like that. So make sure that's clearly identified. Your protection devices, like your earths and your earth and neutral, your main circuit breakers, all of that should be properly labeled, and you can create your labels in EPLAN, and I'll show you an example of that. Label all wires, terminals, earth points, all of that stuff, and make sure you're using good quality labels so that they don't fall off with heat. They have to be UV stable and maybe engraved and stuck on with some sort of silicone. I've seen people put labels onto the trunking, and sometimes when people remove multiple trunkings, they end up putting in the wrong place, and so your labels get missed out. So maybe it's best to mount the labels directly onto the gear tray and onto the device itself. So if one comes off, you've at least got another label in there. So make sure your schematics match your actual physical panel layout. So in your schematics, if you're using 10Q1, make sure in your layout it's 10Q1. The good thing with EPLAN is that you drag and drop your components from your schematic into your panel layout. So it's hard to make a mistake by sometimes you're adding stuff manually, and that could there could be a mismatch. But there are some checks and balances in EPLAN to manage this. It's best to add an enclosure legend to your panel layout so you can match your devices. So, for example, you might have legend number 5, and that's a main isolator, and the part number from the manufacturer is on the legend. Thermal and environmental considerations, and that's quite an important part of a panel, is to make sure that you manage especially your heat dissipation. And the good thing is that EPLAN, especially in the Pro panel and the 3D environment, there's lots of tools that are available where you can calculate your total heat dissipation You can look at your areas of high heat dissipation. You can look at your optimized cooling areas and your restricted areas, your airflow. All of that stuff can be done in EPLAN Pro Panel. There's also tools like Rhythm, which is a free download from Retail. That can help you with your thermal calculations, selecting a fan or an aircon or whatever. So if you haven't used that, maybe try that tool as well. It's best to use if you're using a fan, it's best to have it filtered and make sure you have an exhaust grill to match that fan. And again, if you look at Retail has got some cool products around the fan, some self-cleaning filter fans. So have a look at that as well, and that could help you. And again, based on your calculations, you may need an aircon unit. So have a look at that. Just make sure you don't block your cooling path. And again, EPLAN has some of these tools available in Pro Panel where you can actually see if your cooling path are actually being blocked. I think we must have touched on this, but just make sure that you got the correct enclosure for your environment. If it's in a high dust environment or in a wet area, outdoors, or whatever, just make sure you got the correct IP rating or NEMA rating for your panel. Power and protection, grounding, another big consideration as well for your panel. You've got to properly size your devices, your circuit breaker, and your earth and so forth, and of course the conductors and the cables that go below that. When I look at a design, that's one of the first things I look at. Is the circuit breaker sized correctly for the cables? Are the cables sized correctly for the circuit breaker? Because that is something that can definitely burn down your panel. Use good quality earth bars, the ones with double screws. So specify that, so if one comes loose, at least you've got another one in there to hold your earth. And make sure everything is bonded, like all your metal parts are bonded in your panel. And make a note in your drawings, make sure that the gear tray is bonded to your frame, is bonded to your side panels, your doors, and all of that stuff. Again, the good thing with like the Retail panels, they are self-bonding, but there's no harm in putting a note on the drawings, because sometimes you just don't know which panel is being used. It could be some of the opposition's products where they don't self-bond. So just put a note in your drawings to make sure that they're all bonded. Clearly label your protection devices as well, like your main switch, your main isolator, earth bars, neutral bars, all of that stuff. Mechanical and mounting, I think we may have touched on this slightly, but yeah, in an environment where there's high vibration, like a mobile machine crane or something like that, you may want to use spring washers and so forth to make sure that your DIN rails trunking, your devices are well secured, and try drilling and tapping rather than just screwing it into the gear tray. Yeah, secure all your components, and just make sure that there's some notes on your drawings if you're using bus bars and so forth, that they are torqued to the correct setting. So it pays to have a few notes in your drawings regarding this. Okay, guys, there are just some tips and tricks around panel layouts, things to consider when you're laying out your panel. So how does EPLAN stack up against all of these criteria, and what checks and balances are in place with the different offerings from EPLAN? So I'll just run through them very quickly, and then you can get an idea of what's available in which package. So as far as 2D panel layouts are available, yes, if you've got a select package and you're creating your panel layouts in 2D, of course that's available in the select package. And if you add on the 3D panel layouts, or if you add on Pro Panel, you'll have both options. As long as it's an add-on, you'll have both the 2D and the 3D options. You can create an enclosure legend, yes, in the 2D as well as the 3D options and Pro Panel. That's easy enough. But what about cutouts? And I know you can probably mark out a cutout in the 2D version, but in Pro Panel, there's some nice tools available. So you can add a push button or an HMI or something like that. You can create a cutout quite nicely, and you can export that cutout quite nicely in Pro Panel as well as the 3D option, and I'll show you an example of that. Thermal calculations or thermal designs, that's available both in the 3D add-on as well as Pro Panel. If you want to view your mounting clearance, that's available in the 3D offering as well as Pro Panel. If you want to export your data to a step file or a DXF, that's available in both the 3D add-on as well as Pro Panel. So this is where it starts to get a little bit different. So if you want to export your data to machining, in other words, a Perforex machine or an NCDXF output for cutting out of your gear trays or machining out of your gear trays, your side panels for your aircon and so forth, you would need the Pro Panel add-on for that. If you want to do wire routing and so forth, it's an add-on to Pro Panel, but you only can add it onto Pro Panel. You cannot add it onto the 3D version. So you need Pro Panel for that, but it's an add-on. If you want to check your trunking full capacity, again, it's part of the wire routing process. So it's an add-on to Pro Panel. If you want smart production, where you want to export a file to the shop floor to help with your actual manufacturing and your wire placements and so forth, you need the smart production tool. If you're bending copper and so forth, again, it's another add-on, and that's the copper add-on. So this is a very quick overview on the different packages and what it can do. Most of you would be using the Select from what I can see. So you are very limited to what you can do. Yes, you can get away with it. The 2D sort of works, but moving forward and for the future, maybe something to consider is the 3D panel layouts and Pro Panel. Personally, I think that's going to be the future, and more and more devices on the data portal are available in 3D now, as what it compared to what it was a few years ago. So that's certainly the future. So what I'll do next is I'll jump onto a live demo, and I'll show you some of the key benefits of EPLAN 3D as well as the 2D panel layouts. Okay, so I've got some schematic drawings here, and what I've done is, just to save time, I've created the majority of the panel layout, but I'll delete some of the stuff and I'll reinsert it just to show you. So I've got a very basic schematic drawing here with some power distribution drawings, circuit breaker with dual e-stops. I've got some DOL starters, power supplies, VSDs, and a PLC rack with a few devices connected to those PLCs. I've got an external panel layout here, and again, I didn't create this panel layout from scratch. I downloaded this from the data portal and dragged and dropped those components in. And after I dropped them in, I indicated the key information, like my isolator height from the platform, roughly about 1.7 meters, which is sort of on the top end, the high end of things, but it'll work. I've indicated the position of my aircon, more or less where I want that to be mounted. Key information is here, some dimensions and so forth. So that's as far as the external panel layout is concerned. Then I've got an internal panel layout here. And when I downloaded this part from the data portal, it came through with the gear tray layout, or the GA for the gear tray. So I didn't have to draw that from scratch. All I needed to do was insert my DIN rails and trunking and so forth. Now in the 2D version, these are all graphics. And when I come to the 3D version shortly, you'll see the big difference between this and the 3D version. So here we're doing this manually, we're inserting graphics with some text and so forth in here. So what I'll do is I'll remove this trunking from here, and I'll remove some of these components, and I'll reinsert them just as a quick demo for those of you who are not familiar with the panel layouts. And I'll remove my enclosure legend, and I'll reinsert these components just to show you how this how the 2D version works. So the first thing you need to do is you need to open up your 2D panel navigator. So once your schematic drawings are done, there's a record of all these devices in your 2D panel navigator. So to open your 2D panel navigator, you've got to go to View, Open, and here you'll see a 2D panel layout or your 2D panel navigator. And the shortcut for that is Shift-Control-M, but you can open it from here. So there's a few places that you can open it. If you also go to Devices, you'll see your 2D panel navigator here as well. So basically what this navigator does, it shows you all the components that are being used in your schematic drawing, and it's sorted by the identifier. So this is my project, the demo project, and these are all the components that I've used, and it's sorted by the identifier. So all the circuit breakers are grouped together, and now you can see some ticks. That means I've placed them in my panel layout. If I made a mistake and I placed the wrong component, I'll see a big red dot here. Okay, so I've deleted some of my contactors. So yeah, you can see they've been deleted. They're not placed on the panel layout, whereas these components are placed on the panel layout. Okay, so we'll come to that shortly. First thing what I'll do is I'll try to create a trunking here. And the trunking or a duct is basically a graphic. So here I've got a rectangle. I'm going to pick this corner point here, and notice it's hanging onto my mouse. So I'm going to put in some dimensions. I know the width of this gear tray is roughly about 1100. So 0.100, 1100 space minus 60 millimeters, because I want to draw this going from top to bottom. So if I go enter, it's going to place this trunking in here. So what I would like to always do is to change the color of this trunking so that I know the difference between a trunking and a DIN rail and so forth. So I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to go into the properties of this trunking, and I'm going to change this color to a gray. Pretty simple. And I'm going to go OK, and oh sorry, I need to fill this. And I need to press this button here, fill surface. And now the trunking is now gray. So what about the text? If I want to add some text, so what I can do is I can go into my text, and I've got my text already here, 60 width by 80 high. That's fine. If I don't have it, I'll just type it in, and I'm going to go into the format. And in this case, I'm going to add a an alignment box, a rectangular alignment box, also with the same width, 1100 by 60. And if I go OK, it's going to place. Oh, actually, one thing I forgot to do was I'll place it here in any case. I forgot to change the font. Because my panel is scaled 1:10. I need to scale this as well. So I'll just make this 25. And now that's a reasonable font. So what you'll notice with the text box, the pickup position is only in the center here. So to get the center point of this trunking, the trick I use is just to draw a line, a diagonal line. Make sure I pick this correct point. Draw a diagonal line across that, and then I've got the center point of that line. So I'm going to move this, and the shortcut for move is V. I press V. I'm going to move this to the center of that, and now I can delete that. Should delete the correct line. Sometimes you gotta just make sure that it's center back. Okay. Oops. I can being a bit tricky. Okay. Yep. And delete that, and now I can just move this maybe back to the background. So that's a trick we use to create your trunking or your duct. I can change the color of that font as well to black to make it match the rest of my trunking. Okay, so what I'll do is now I'll place some of the contactors that I deleted in here. And to do that, I can either place them one at a time. I can drag and drop that component in here, or alternatively, I can select all of these at the same time. And before I place that, I'll just show you a couple of settings that's quite important. So if you right-click anywhere here, you'll see your settings, and here you can see the direction in which you want to place your components. Do you want to place them horizontally or vertically? So in this case, it's horizontal, so I'll take this. That's fine. And the angle, you want to place them 0 degrees, which in this case, it is 0 degrees. But if you wanted to place them 90 degrees, let's say you had your terminals at 90 degrees, you need to select 90 degrees here. And where do you want the pickup position to be? So in my case, it's middle left. I'm happy with that. But if you want to say middle right or something like that, you can change this here. And I want to bring in the macro with the dimensions from my parts database. So that's fine. So I'll go OK, and I'll select all these components, right click, and I've got a few different options. I can place them onto my mounting rail, or I can place them directly onto the panel. So in this case, these components go onto a mounting rail, so I'm going to choose this option here. But just say, for example, I was placing the VSDs, I'll place them directly onto the mounting panel. So I'm going to choose the mounting rail here, select the mounting rail where I want to place them, more or less here, and just go enter. Enter on my keyboard, and it will automatically place them for you in the center of the DIN rail. And now you can see they all ticked, and they are all placed onto the center of this DIN rail. I'm not happy with the format of this. Of course, I want to change that. So there's a few tricks that you can do. You can double click onto the device, and you can go into the display, and you can see that they both docked to each other. In other words, the legend number is docked to the DT. I can undock it from here, and the shortcut to move devices is Control B. But if you go to Home, you can see it here, Move Devices. So I can then go Control B, and I can move this legend number to the bottom. You can, of course, save the setting. If I wanted to, I can go and save the setting. So the next time I don't have to go and redo this. I've got the setting saved, so I can now call up my demo circuit breaker or demo contactor. It doesn't really matter. You can use the same thing for a contactor or the circuit breaker. I only have to do this once. Now I can copy the format, and I can paste it across all my devices. So the copy and paste format is this brush here. So now it all looks nice and tidy. But I'll just close this for a moment. But my enclosure numbers have gone off because it's picked up the next available number or the last number that was available. But I want them in some sort of order, so they look nice and tidy. So how do I sort that out? So I'll just open this again. I'll go back to my 2D panel navigator. And now I'm going to go to the gear tray itself where I've placed that devices. Now you can see in here, I've got an internal gear tray. That means all the devices that are placed onto this gear tray. So what I can do is I can right click, and I can go and edit my legend items. And it brings up this dialog box. I can go to number, and I can choose the sequence, or I can give it a specific sequence. So my start sequence can be 1, increments of 1, and I want to go horizontal, in other words, from top to bottom, left to right. So I'll choose the sequence here, and all the identical devices, if I tick this, all the identical devices will be the same number. So in other words, if I've got 2 contactors or 2 circuit breakers that are the same, the legend numbers will be the same. I go OK, and OK. And now it's tidied up those numbers. And it's given me a nice logical sequence starting from the top to the bottom. Okay, so the next step is I'll insert an enclosure legend. Close this now. So to insert an enclosure legend, all I need to do is go to my reports, and again, it's under Tools and Generate. I've got a shortcut here, and I can generate that report. Go into my reports, and it's a new report. I go New, Enclosure Legend, and I want to do a manual placement into the current page. Manual placement into the current page. Just go OK, and I can choose a form. I've got a demo form here. I go OK, and now it's going to place that somewhere here. So it looks nice and tidy, and I've got a cross-reference. So if I look at my 30, so these 4 contactors, straight away I can see it's the same part number. That one is different, and these 2 are different as well. So I can see all of that items are here. So it looks nice and tidy. If I add more components and if I remove components, all I need to do is update this report. I don't have to replace it. Okay, guys, so that was a very quick overview of the 2D panel layout. If you guys need more help or need more information on that, please reach out and I'll be happy to help you separately. So what I'll do is I'll jump onto the 3D panel layout and I'll show you some of the benefits of that. So it's exactly the same project. All I did was I made another copy of it here just so that I can create a separate layout space, but it's exactly the same project. And this time I'm going to go into my layout space. So that's a big difference between the 2D panel layout and the 3D panel layout. The 3D panel layout is created in what we call layout space. If you're familiar with AutoCAD, it's like model space, and then you have your paper space. So how do you get to your layout space? You go to View, Open, and you'll see here, there's layout space. Okay, and that will create a navigator here. So if I go into that, here I can see this is my project, and I've already got an enclosure in here that's pre-done for me. And this is, I'll just go to the gear tray and I'll show you this. This is an isometric view. If I want to view the front, I'll just go here, and now I can see my panel layout. Although it's in 3D, I can view the front, or I can view it in an isometric view. So what I'm going to do, we'll come back to this. I want to create a new layout space, and I want to show you how you actually create a panel layout in 3D very quickly. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go new, and I'm going to just call this MCC10 because that's where I copied the drawings, that set of drawings, and I created a new set called MCC10. I'm going to go OK. So now it's created a new layout space for me called MCC10, and under MCC10 I'm going to insert an enclosure. So you can do a couple of things here. One is go directly to the data portal and bring in an enclosure. Go to the data portal, download that enclosure onto your parts database, and then you can insert it. So I'll show you a few different options. So just like how we have a 2D panel navigator, there's also a 3D panel navigator. So I'm going to open that panel navigator, and in here I've got my MCC10, and I've got an MCC. Under the MCC, I do have an MCC already there allocated. So all I need to do is drag and drop that MCC into my model space, and it hangs onto my mouse. I can place it anywhere. It doesn't really matter. So that is one option to place this MCC. If I didn't have an MCC in my schematics, I can go to Insert, and in here I've got an enclosure. So if I go in here, it takes me straight into my parts database, and I can bring through an enclosure here. It's exactly the same enclosure. And I can place it there. Okay, I only need one for this project, so I'm going to delete that one. So yeah, I've got an enclosure, but what you'll notice is now I can see all the different components that this enclosure is made up of, including the gear tray. So if I double click on that, I can see the gear tray. And if I go into my cube, I can see the front view of that gear tray. So by the way, this is known as the cube. There's different options to view. You can also go to view, and you can view the front view here. You can view the isometric view here. It's similar to the cube. The southeast or the southwest view, or the front view. Okay, so I'll come back to that shortly. So now on the enclosure, I want to insert a plinth, and maybe the side panels, and maybe a wiring pocket. So I'll show you how easy this is to do compared to the 2D version. So in here, under Insert, I can also insert accessories. So the first thing we need to do is, of course, select the enclosure and go to Insert Accessories. And which accessories I want to insert? I want to insert the side walls. And I've got my selection in here. I've got my left side wall. I'm going to go OK. Use this arrow to bring that down. The next one I'll select is my right side wall. Use this arrow and bring that down. So I've got my two side walls. If I wanted to insert my plinth, And this all comes through from the data portal, by the way. We didn't have to create this separately. I've got 100 plinth, which I'm going to use and bring that down. So all these components are in my accessories. If I go OK, it's going to automatically place them for me. So it's placed my plinth nice and tidy here, and I've got my side panels. And if I go to the opposite view, if I go and view my northwest, I can see the side panel on that side as well. By the way, you can set a home view, whichever you prefer. If you prefer the southeast or southwest, you can make it into a home view. So what about a wiring pocket? If I wanted to place a wiring pocket onto this door here, the best thing to do is to isolate the door. So if I want it on the right door, I'll just go open the right door, and I want the inside of the right door. So here's the inside of my right door, and I want to place a wiring pocket here. So I'm going to go back to my accessories, and I'm going to select the enclosure first, accessories, and I've got a wiring pocket here, and I've got different options for the wiring pocket. So I'll choose this one here, which is an A3 wiring pocket. Go OK, and bring that down. And if I go OK, now the wiring pocket is going to hang onto my mouse. And if I press A on my keyboard, I'm going to tab through the different handles and selection points. So I want the top center, and I'm going to place it in the center of the door. So now if I go back to my enclosure, I got the wiring pocket placed in here. So straight away, you can see some of the advantages of the 3D. It's so much easier to place devices accurately onto your panel. Okay, now I can expand this, and I can go onto the gear tray, because I'm interested in the gear tray for now. I want to place some DIN rails, I want to place some trunking, and I want to place some devices in there. But I want the front view of that. Okay, same trick here. If I want to place in DIN rails and trunking, all I do is I go and find that component onto in my list of components, and this time it's the actual component. It's not just a graphic line. It's actual DIN rail and trunking devices that I've downloaded from the data portal. So I've got some retail DIN rails trunking here, which I'm going to use. So I'm going to use the 80 by 40. Go OK. And now it's hanging onto my mouse. I'm going to select this point here, and I'm going to draw that across there. I'm going to select the bottom, place that there, right on the other end. Now I'm going to go to the top, select this corner here, and I'm just going to press A on my keyboard, change the orientation, place that here, that corner, do the same thing here. Select this corner, press A on my keyboard, change my orientation, and place it in this corner here. So you can see that only took me a couple of seconds. And if I go into the isometric view, now I can see this trunking. It's placed here. Okay, back to my front view. And now I want to place a another trunking, say 200 millimeters from the top out here. So again, really easy. Select the trunking and go OK. And this time I've got a trick. So I can right click and go placement options. So I want to place this 200 millimeters below. So that's my Y. And I'll go minus 200 because my X is 0 directly below. And I go OK. I'm going to choose this corner point here and draw the trunking right across here. Okay, now for my extra low voltage, I want to insert a 25 millimeter trunking below that. So again, I'm going to go to my trunking, find a 25 millimeter, go OK, pick this edge here. Oops, wrong place. Okay, doesn't matter. I can, let me just redo that actually. I'm just going to be careful about picking the correct edge and go A on my keyboard. Select that point there. Okay, so now I've got a 25 millimeter trunking below that. And what if I want to place a DIN rail in the center here? Real easy in Pro Panel. If I go here to my mounting rail, Again, these parts are available in the data portal. I've got a DIN rail in there. I'm going to go OK. And if I right click, I can now adopt the length of this trunking. And if I right click again, I can say place center. So if I choose the trunking on the opposite side, it's going to place it in the center. Real easy. So let me go into my isometric view, and now you can see this. Okay, back to my front view. And now I want this 5 times, and I can use a trick for that. Select these DIN rail trunking and so forth, and right click, go duplicate. The shortcut for that is D. Pick this point here. Pick that point. Oops, sorry, I think I picked the wrong one. Let's try again. D on my keyboard. Pick this point here, and pick this point here. And now it's going to place that 5 times. Do I want to number it? Yes, I want to number that. And very quickly, I've got my my DIN rail and my trunking done for me. So I think I may have done something. Oh, it's okay. Okay, so if I go to my isometric view, now I can see that in isometric view. Okay, back to my front view, and let me tidy that up. So what I want to do is I want to draw a trunking down here in the center because I've got my isolator here. I want to do the same thing here. I want to place my VSD at the bottom, so maybe I want to put an additional trunking down here. Okay, so I'm going to insert another trunking, say 80 millimeter, sorry, 80 by 60. Okay, I'm going to pick the center point here and draw that here. Then I'm going to pick this. I'll pick this point here and I'll draw it here. Okay, so I need to tidy this up because now my trunking is over my DIN rail, but there's a trick for that. If you go to edit, you can change length. So if I select that, I'll change the length for that, change the length for that, change the length for that. I'll change the length for that. So real easy, I very quickly created my trunking and DIN rail layout. Isometric view, it all looks nice and tidy. And now I'm ready to place my components onto that. Again, for the component placement, real easy. Find the components that you want. Just say, for example, these contactors here, I can select them one at a time, or I can select all 3, right click, and I can go and place. Let's place these components, say, let's place them here. Nice and easy. And now let's place those components in there. If I go into isometric view, I can see them placed with the accessories. I didn't have to place the accessories separately, the contact blocks and so forth. Okay, let's place some circuit breakers under my queue. So my main switch, I can just drag that and I can place that somewhere there. If I want to replace some of my circuit breakers for my e-stop zones, right click, place, I can place them here. If I want to replace my circuit breakers for my DOLs and my VSDs, right click, place, and I'll place them here. Okay, so these contactors should be directly below my e-stop zones. Not a problem. I can place them there. Oh, sorry, wrong one. I'll place it back here. I should place this one here actually. And I can move these so there. Yeah, so there's some nice tricks in Pro Panel. What if I wanted to group them together, move them to close to each other? I can select these devices and I can line up the gaps. So now it closes the gaps. I can do the same thing here, select these devices and line up gap together, select the device as a reference, and it closes that gap. Nice and tidy. What about a VSD? I've got 3 VSDs here, and I want 100 millimeters from the top, and I want to place it 25 millimeters from the side. I can drag them in, right click, go to my placement options, say 25 millimeters along the from the X, and 100 millimeters below, so minus 100. Okay, and now I'll pick this corner point here, and nice and tidy, it's placed it for me. I'll go into my isometric view just to show you that. Okay, guys, I'm not going to do the entire panel layout. I think you guys get the idea here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my enclosure here, and I'm going to pick the right door, for example. Right door, the outside of the right door. Or actually, let me choose the left door. I'll choose the left door and the outside of the left door. And here I've got the front view of that. What if I want to replace an HMI or something in here, or a cutout for an HMI? So there's lots of tools in here in terms of cutouts and so forth that you can utilize. So just say, for example, I had a cutout of 300 millimeters in width and 200 millimeters high. I can choose this cutout here for an HMI. And if I press A on my keyboard, I can get the center point of this HMI. And where do I want to place that? I can go Control W, which is a shortcut for my placement option, and my X is fine. And here I need to choose my Y, and that is 1500. If I want to place this 1500 from the bottom of the enclosure, plus I've got a plinth that's 100, so 1600 roughly. Go OK. And now I can choose the center point of my panel, say somewhere there, and now it's placed a cutout for my HMI. So if I go into my enclosure, I can see that cutout there. Okay, guys, just to save some time, I'm going to jump onto the panel that we've already created, which is this one here, and that's pretty much completed for me. And I'm just going to show you some of the design checks and balances that we have in here. So let's start with the like a collision check, or maybe it's best to show you that on another panel. Just say, for example, I'll just jump back to this one here, sorry, for now. Just say, for example, I place this VSD in here, and or if I had a fan or another device in here that I wanted to insert, but in 2D you can't really see whether it's going to collide, but in 3D you can see whether this device is going to collide. So there's something called a collision check here. If I've got that turned on, and if I try to insert this VSD above another VSD, you notice the color. It shows me in red. That means this device is colliding with another device. I can place it here, but I cannot place it over another device. And this is particularly handy when you've got a fan that you want to insert over a VSD, say, for example. You can check for collisions. Okay, so I'll jump back onto the panel that's completed, and now I can show you things like mounting clearance. So let me go into the front view, and maybe this the gear tray. Front view again. So I've got VSDs in here. How can I check if I'm adhering to the client's, the manufacturer's requirements? I can go into do a collision, a check for my mounting clearance. So I've got a mounting clearance in here, and now I can check. Okay, this VSD complies with the manufacturer's requirements in terms of my clearances. Something you can't do in the 2D panel layout. I can also check my drilling view. So I can see all the mounting holes and so forth, information that came through when I've inserted this part from the data portal. So I can see all the drilling in here. If I zoom into this device, I'm just going to remove this mounting. If I zoom into this device, I can actually see the drilling pattern for that VSD as well. Okay, and there's a lot of thermal calculations that you can do, including your, if you go to tools, you can actually see your total power dissipation here. You can calculate that, and it's going to calculate the total power dissipation. And if you go to your paper view, into the properties, right click, you can see here your total heat loss. In this case, is 515, 516 watts. Okay, back to my view, and now I can go to my thermal design, and I can view the devices with a high heat density, and it shows that these VSDs and the power supplies are devices with high heat density. I can check the direction of my airflow, and probably the best to do that with the enclosure on, and I'll go to the front view, and maybe I can hide the doors. So I'll just double click and select these two doors and hide them, hide the doors. So now you can see the direction of your airflow. You can also check for obstructed areas, if any of these areas are obstructed, and probably the best view is this one here for that. And you can also see your optimum cooling area. So I'll go back into the front view. And now you can see your optimum cooling area. So you may want to put a diverter in here to divert some of the airflow down here for your VSDs, or move your VSDs to a different location. So it's got lots of checks and balances in there. So once all of that is done, the next step will be to export your data. You can select your enclosure, and then you can export your data for manufacturing into a Perforex machine if you want to use the likes of CSL, their services, or you can export it into an NCDXF. That's for your HMI cutouts, or your aircon cutouts, or even your drilling tray, your gear tray drilling, and so forth. Okay, so once the panel layout is configured in model space or layout space, how do you bring that information into your paper space? So here the best is to go back into your paper space, and you need to create your layouts in your paper space. So I've got them already created in here. This is the 2D view, the front view of it, but this comes through from my 3D layouts. I'll show you just now how you can add that in. So you can have a front view. Because I played around with it, I need to update that. And here I've got more front views. Again, I need to update that because I've been playing around with it. I've got the gear tray, and I've got the shaded view and the wireframe view of that. So I'm going to then remove this here, and I'm going to reinsert that. So I'll delete that, remove some of that for now. And if I go to insert, I can see model view here. I'm going to select my model view, draw a window like a viewport. Brings up this dialog box. What do I want to see? I want to see the gear tray. So my mounting panel or the gear tray. Go OK. Yes, the front view of it. I can choose the different views, isometric view, front view, and I want it to fit within that window. Or I can choose a scale, one of the two. Go OK. It comes up with a wireframe view. I can change that view again into a shaded view. Now I've got a shaded view of that. Okay, now if I want to view my drilling, for example, I've got a gear tray here, and if I want to view the drilling pattern for that, I can I'll delete that, and I can go and insert a drilling view. Again, I'm creating like a viewport. And what do I want to view? I want to view my gear tray again. And I want to fit it into that window and go OK. And I've got the blue here. For my isometric views, all I need to do was insert another model view here and choose my isometric view. I just need to update that because I've been playing around with it. I can also toggle. Let's say, for example, I wanted to hide these doors. I can select that and I can go through my toggle and I can toggle these doors. Now the doors have been hidden. So I've got some labels and so forth here, which you can create in EPLAN, of course, for your panel layouts and place them onto your panel layouts here. So guys, that was a very quick overview of 2D and 3D panel layouts. If you guys got any questions, please, feel free to ask any questions. We can unmute you or unmute them, or I'll ask Farhana to unmute you guys if you got any questions or any comments. Please feel free to ask your questions or offer your comments.
There's one in the chat.
What's in the chat? What's the question, Farhana? So one of the questions, well, do you need a professional license to carry out this, the 3D panel layouts? You don't really need the professional license, but what you will need is the 3D add-on or Pro Panel add-on to your license. So if you've got a select license with the 2D panel layouts, you need to add on the 3D panel layouts or Pro Panel to get the 3D panel layouts. Even if you buy the professional license, it does not include the 3D panel layouts. It's a separate add-on. On that subject, EPLAN is in the next month or so, when they release Platform 2026, they're going to be coming out with a few new packages, and they're adding on 3D panel layouts in some of their packages. And even the Pro Panel package is going to be changed slightly. I don't have all the information, but when that is released, I'll pass that information to you. So just watch the space. There's a lot more going on in the next few months regarding Pro Panel and 3D panel layouts. So